Hello, it's Eleanor from Hastings Museum and Art Gallery here again. Welcome to our last Festive Makes video, or in fact our Festive Bakes video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make gingerbread.
Our first bake today is a Christmas favourite, gingerbread. If you have thicker pastry, it will give you softer biscuits, and thinner pastry will produce crunchier biscuits. If it's almost Christmas, you could make some gingerbread decorations to hang on the tree. The ingredients you'll need are 350 grams or 12 ounces of plain flour, 175 grams or 6 ounces of light soft brown sugar, 100 grams or 4 ounces of butter, 4 tablespoons of golden syrup, 1 teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda, 1½ teaspoons of ground ginger, and a medium egg. Put the flour and ground ginger in a bowl and give it a stir. Then cut the butter into small chunks and add it to the bowl. Mix the ingredients together using your hands. You need to squash the lumps of butter and get them to mix with the flour by rubbing the mixture between your thumb and fingers. Keep going until any big lumps have gone and you have a bowl of what look like breadcrumbs. Next, add the golden syrup and brown sugar to the bowl and stir. Break the egg into a cup or small bowl and beat it with a fork or whisk before putting it in the bowl with the other ingredients. Keep mixing with a spoon until all the dry ingredients have gone from the bottom of the bowl, and you should end up with a mixture that you can squeeze into a ball of gingerbread dough. Cover 2 baking trays with greaseproof paper or wipe them with cooking oil to stop the gingerbread sticking while it's in the oven. Turn the oven on at 200 degrees C, 180 degrees C for a fan oven, or gas mark 6, so it can heat up while you cut out your gingerbread. Make sure you have a clean, dry surface to roll out your dough with enough room to work on. Cover the worktop and rolling pin with flour to stop the dough sticking, and then start to roll it out. Once you've rolled it out a bit, check that it isn't sticking to the surface underneath. Every so often, turn the dough 90 degrees, a quarter of a circle, so you can roll it the other way, and add more flour to the work surface if needed. Keep doing this until the dough is about ½ centimetre thick. This should give you a biscuit that's crunchy on the outside and chewy in the middle. If you prefer biscuits that are crunchy all the way through, roll your dough out a little bit thinner. If you have cookie cutters, use them to cut out your gingerbread shapes, being careful to get as many out of the dough as possible. If you don't have cookie cutters, you could use an upturned glass to make round shapes, or make a template from cardboard that you can cut around, something like a star shape, for example. Move the cut-out shapes to the baking trays. Leave about 2 centimetres between each shape, so they have room to puff up in the oven without touching each other. Once you've cut out as many shapes as you can from the dough, collect all the leftovers into a ball and roll the dough out again to cut out more shapes. Cook the gingerbread for 12 to 15 minutes until they're golden brown, but I check them after 10 minutes just in case. I found the shapes on the top row puffed up a lot, but the shapes towards the bottom of the oven puffed up less. Leave the gingerbread to cool down a bit before moving on to a cooling rack. The gingerbread needs to be completely cooled before you decorate it, or the icing will melt. There are different ways to decorate your gingerbread shapes. You can use icing to add patterns or details, or as glue to stick on decorations like sweets or edible glitter. You can buy tubes of icing which is ready to pipe or draw with on your gingerbread, or you can make your own icing. Put 2 to 3 tablespoons of water in a small bowl and add icing sugar a bit at a time until you get a mixture that's liquid enough to pipe but solid enough to set on the biscuit. Put the icing into a small plastic food bag and squeeze it down to one of the bottom corners. Then cut a very small hole across the corner so the icing can come out. And draw on your biscuits by squeezing the icing out through the hole with your hands. If the gingerbread has puffed up and is cracked on the top, you could try covering the whole top with icing and then decorating instead. These cheesy puff pastry snacks are meant to be shaped like wrap presents, but look more like messy sandwiches. The original recipe used grated cheddar cheese, but I think these feta and red pepper pesto ones are tasty, if less elegant. Some savoury snacks will help to balance out all those Christmas sugary treats. The ingredients you need for this are 1 pack of ready-made puff pastry, 75 grams of feta cheese cut into thin slices, 3 to 4 teaspoons of roasted red pepper pesto, and 2 tablespoons of milk. Unroll your ready-made puff pastry and cover half in the pesto. Cut the feta into thin slices and place on top. I'm afraid this is a reconstruction because I forgot to take a photo when I was doing it. Fold the pastry over and seal, and gently roll the pastry out further, being careful not to push the contents out. If you have a cookie cutter, you can use it to make cut-out shapes through the pastry. If you don't, you could use a small upturned glass or just cut the pastry into squares with a knife. Get as many shapes out of the pastry as possible and then put them on a baking tray either lined with greaseproof paper or covered in oil. Brush the tops of the shapes with milk and then bake at 200 degrees C or 180 degrees C in a fan oven or at gas mark 6 for 10 to 12 minutes or until risen and golden. Then put them on a serving plate or cooling rack. These will keep for 3 days in an airtight container. Mince pies are another Christmas tradition, and homemade ones always taste better than store-bought. The ingredients you'll need for this are, for the sweet pastry, 250 grams of plain flour, 50 grams of icing sugar, 125 grams of unsalted butter, which is cold and cut into cubes, and 1 large egg, plus another beaten egg to glaze the top of your pies. And the filling is half a jar of mincemeat. Weigh out the flour and icing sugar and sieve into a bowl. Then weigh out the butter. Weigh out the flour and icing sugar and sieve into a bowl. Then weigh out the butter. 125 grams is half a block of butter, so you may be able to just cut a block in half. It needs to come straight from the fridge so it's nice and cold. Cut the butter into small cubes and add to the bowl. Rub the butter and dry ingredients together between your thumb and fingers until there are no large lumps and the mix looks like breadcrumbs. Beat the egg in a separate bowl with a fork or whisk and then add to the mixture. Stir with a spoon or your hands until the mix becomes a ball of dough. Then dust the surface of the dough with flour and wrap it in cling film or a plastic bag. Put the dough in the fridge and leave it for at least 30 minutes. Turn on your oven to 180 degrees C or gas mark 4. Wipe a bun sheet baking tray, the ones with the holes in for making pies, with butter or margarine so the pastry won't stick. Cover your work surface and rolling pin with flour. Get the dough from the fridge and roll the pastry out until it's about half a centimetre thick. Use a pastry cutter or large glass to cut out round pieces of dough that will fit the baking tray. I started out with 6, but don't forget to leave some pastry for the tops of the pies. Gently press the pastry rounds into the holes in the baking tray, and then add about 1 heaped teaspoon of mincemeat into each pastry case. Roll out the rest of the pastry and cut out the pie lids. I've chosen stars. If you prefer a sealed lid on your mince pies, make a round top and seal it around the edges of the pie with some beaten egg. Make a couple of small holes or slashes in the top to let the steam out while the pie is cooking. If you have any pastry left over, you can always make more pies. In the end, I made 8. Brush the tops of the pies with beaten egg, or wipe it on with your fingers, so that the pastry goes brown in the oven. Cook the pies at 180 degrees C or gas mark 4 for about 15 minutes until they're golden brown. Once out of the oven, take the pies out of the baking tray, being very careful as they'll be extremely hot, and leave on a cooling rack. Our final bake today is tea loaf. The tea loaf is a light fruit cake made with fruit that's been soaked overnight in tea, hence the name. Eat it on its own or with butter or margarine. I'm going to show you how to make a gluten-free version as an alternative to traditional Christmas cake, and the recipe doesn't use any dairy products either. The ingredients you'll need are 350 grams or 12 ounces of dried fruit, the zest of 1 lemon or orange, 2 Earl Grey or Lady Grey tea bags steeped in 300 millilitres of boiling water, 2 medium eggs lightly beaten, 250 grams or 9 ounces of white spelt flour, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 200 grams of light brown sugar, and margarine or cooking oil to grease the baking tin. If you don't need the recipe to be gluten-free, you can swap the spelt flour and baking powder for ordinary self-raising flour. Weigh out your dried fruit and put it in a large bowl. I used 6 ounces of sultanas and 6 ounces of cranberries. You'll be using the same bowl for mixing all the ingredients together later, so make sure it has spare stirring room. Use a grater to add the zest of an orange or a lemon, whichever you prefer. Then make 300 millilitres of strong tea with boiling water and 2 tea bags. Pour the hot tea over the fruit. Put a plate over the bowl and leave overnight so the fruit soaks up the tea. The recipe uses Earl Grey or Lady Grey tea as they both have ingredients that make them citrusy. By morning, the fruit should have absorbed the tea and be plump and juicy. Before adding the rest of the ingredients, put the oven on at 100 degrees C, 160 degrees C for a fan oven, or gas mark 4. Grease your loaf tin and then line it with greaseproof paper. Weigh out the flour and sieve it with the baking powder into the bowl. Weigh out the brown sugar and use a spoon to break down any lumps before adding it to the bowl. Beat the 2 eggs in a separate bowl with a fork or whisk and then stir them into your mixture. Keep stirring until all the dry ingredients have gone from the bottom of the bowl. Then pour the mixture into the loaf tin and use a spoon to level it out. Bake for 45 minutes, then check whether the cake is done. You may need to bake it for another 30 minutes or so, depending on your tin and your oven. How do I know when my tea loaf is ready? Well, the top of the cake should be firm to touch and spring back if you poke it gently with your finger. Or you can check by pushing a metal skewer or knife into the middle of the cake, pulling it out again and seeing what's stuck. If it comes out clean and dry, the cake is cooked in the middle. If it comes out with cake mix on it, you need to bake your tea loaf for longer.
So I'm afraid that's the end of our Festive Makes series. Thank you very much for watching the videos. I hope you enjoyed them and you managed to have a go at some of the makes. Just before I go, I want to apologise for my attention-seeking toaster who managed